Welcome to live show number 2 at Peek Around the Corner with your host, Greg Flugar. Please, at first, let me know if the audio and the visual, let me know if this is even working. For those who are with us last night on live show number 2, we ran into quite a bit of issues. We had 2 live streamings going on at the same time. That was my fault. The show is going great. It's growing fast. We only have really one issue with the show, and that's the host itself. I will have a stern conversation with the host after the show. But let me know if anybody is seeing this show, as we are hopefully going live with Peek Around the Corner live show number 2. Today we're going to talk about the Notre Dame Fighting Irish and what the news that broke on Sports Business Journal last night in regards to the Notre Dame Fighting Irish is written in the contract of the new Big Ten media contract. So that is big news. We're going to talk about it. But then I also want this to be an open discussion on college football. We're at week 0. I really want to talk about the football games, Northwestern, Nebraska, some steam happening in Evanston, Illinois about this backup quarterback, Brendan Sullivan. A lot of positivity out of Fitzgerald's camp in regards to Brendan Sullivan. So I think I do really want to talk about that game. But first of all, we're going to talk about the Big Ten. And I hope everything's going good. I really don't see anything in the chat yet. James Balch says it's looking good. So hopefully we're okay. Let's go directly to the Sports Business Journal and what they reported last night. Okay. Big Ten expansion. Here's what the contract says. If Notre Dame joins the Big Ten within the next 7 years, CBS, Fox, and NBC know exactly how much extra they will have to pay in rights fees. The specific dollar figure, which is not publicly known, is spelled out in the contracts. No other school is mentioned in these deals by name, and the contracts don't assign a dollar figure to any other school that may join the conference, according to several sources. We'll get back to that in a moment. Notre Dame is the only school that has specific language about escalators. If, say, the Big Ten adds 2 West Coast teams, and let's just put out there Oregon and Washington, the networks have agreed to have good faith conversations with the conference about opening their deals and adjusting their rights fees. But the specific increases are not spelled out in the contract language, I'm told. This is from, again, Sports Business Journal. Having a specific number attached to Notre Dame provides the conference and the Fighting Irish with some certainty for the value of their rights if the Irish do decide to join the Big Ten. So we're going to go through this report with a fine-tooth comb. I think there's a lot of hints to this just small little report. First of all, let's go start at the bottom. Having a specific number attached to Notre Dame provides the conference and the Fighting Irish with some certainty for the value of their rights if the Irish do decide to join the Big Ten. So therefore, who knows that specific dollar figure in the Big Ten contract if the Big Ten joins, if Notre Dame joins the Big Ten? CBS, Fox, NBC, Big Ten, and Notre Dame. Notre Dame knows the number that's in the Big Ten contract. That specific dollar figure, I want to talk about that specific dollar figure. First of all, it's been reported that the Big Ten contract, over the life of it, as it's written right now, you would average $75 million per school of the 16 Big Ten schools. We're adding UCLA and USC, $75 million for the basically tier 1, tier 2, most of that, with CBS, NBC, and Fox paying out to about $1.2 billion. We're not going to get buried in the numbers, but just say $75 million per school. That's been reported by a couple outlets. Let's just say that's true to the life of the contract. You can imagine that Notre Dame would want to know what they would be paid if they joined the Big Ten Conference. So when people talk about that specific dollar figure, which is not publicly known, I don't really think that dollar figure, this is speculation on my part, but let me explain why I've come to this conclusion. I don't think that dollar figure is in regards to if Notre Dame joins the Big Ten Conference, we add $160 million to the totality of the conference per year. In other words, that would be the $80 million for Notre Dame, and let's say a $5 million increase for the other 16 schools, which would be another $80 million. Let's just say we're pretending here that if Notre Dame comes, there's a $160 million value on Notre Dame if they join the Big Ten. I don't think that's how it's spelled out. Because if that's how it's spelled out, now hang with me here, if that's how it's spelled out, then if other schools are added with Notre Dame, like Stanford and Washington, Oregon, their value isn't going to be the same as Notre Dame, and suddenly Notre Dame's payouts is diluted. Correct? So I don't think Notre Dame really cares what that dollar figure is that they would add to the Big Ten, because it could get diluted and their payouts, conference payouts, would be less. I think that dollar figure is actually, bam, Notre Dame, if you join the Big Ten, you would receive $80 million per season. Whatever that number is, it would be spelled out regardless of who is added before you or when you join or after you. Okay? Notre Dame's going to want to know how much they get in the life of this contract that goes from 2023 to 2030. Do you get me on that? So if Notre Dame, and we're just throwing a number out there, we don't know what the number is. If the contract says $80 million per year, obviously the other 16 Big Ten schools would make $80 million a year. Or maybe it's 85 million, maybe it's 90. I don't know what it is. None of us know what it is except for CBS, Fox, and NBC. But I think that's an important part to point out, because Notre Dame, this is a love letter to Notre Dame. This is like, we have been dating you and now we want to buy you the ring. You understand? This is how much you are of value to us if you join us. And it's way more if you stay single, Notre Dame. This is the wedding ring. This is the wedding invitations. This is how much we're going to spend on the honeymoon. This is how much we're going to spend on the house. Now, hang with me on this analogy. I will get to your comments here in a second. But the house part, Notre Dame, if you marry into the Big Ten now, you will have a voice, right? And the furniture, where, all those things that come with owning a house. Notre Dame, you will have a voice now if you join the Big Ten instead of 2 or 3 years from now. This is an incentive for Notre Dame to join the Big Ten. It's laid out, and I'm sure that number figure is pretty high. But let's get to this other point. And I know there's a whole lot of comments. We're going to get to it. But I have to talk about this point here. No other school is mentioned in these deals by name. And the contracts don't assign a dollar figure to any other school that may join the conference, according to several sources. And we're going to get back to that. Notre Dame is the only school that has specific language about escalators. If, say, the Big Ten adds 2 West Coast teams, the networks have agreed to have a good faith conversations with the conference about opening their deals and adjusting their fees. But specific increases are not spelled out in the contract language, I'm told. So Notre Dame, of all the potential expansion candidates of Big Ten, which we at Peek Around the Corner would include Stanford, Washington, Oregon, Notre Dame. Some are saying California. We'll put California in for this discussion. None of those other schools except for Notre Dame are written in this contract. Therefore, some have speculated on the internet, Twitter, that this is a cold water dumped on the potential expansion of the Big Ten. And only Notre Dame's inclusion would spur Big Ten expansion. Because those other schools might dilute the value of the current Big Ten schools. Only Notre Dame is written in this contract. Therefore, it's a bucket of cold water on potential expansion unless Notre Dame comes in. There's two problems with that. With that thought. Number one, USC and UCLA are not going to be alone on an island on the West Coast. That's not the vision of Kevin Warren. That's not the vision of the Big Ten presidents. That's not even, okay, we'll just leave it at that. That's not going to happen. Okay? Keep that in mind. Some of you may not believe that. That's fine. But I'm just saying UCLA and USC are not going to be alone on an island. Therefore, there's going to be other expansion. The second big point. There's no other specific schools written in this contract because one big reason is because they can't be written in this contract. No one should expect Oregon's name and Washington's name and Stanford's name to be listed in this contract because they are a member of another conference. A Big Ten negotiating a contract with CBS, Fox, and NBC are not going to list schools from another conference. Not happening. I'm sorry. So to me, that's not even part of the conversation, right? Fox has a current TV contract that runs until 2024 with the PAC, with Washington, Oregon, Stanford. They're not going to. So I'm not buying that West School's teams are not listed is a big deal. I don't think it is a big deal at all. Now, I will say this, and I'll get to your questions here in a second, or comments, or people disagreeing with me, which is all good, which is all fine. That's why we have this show. You can see the pathway here. It's sort of written out, right? Notre Dame is going to increase the value of the Big Ten contract. Basically it says it here. How much extra they will have to pay in rights fees. That doesn't quite say it, but Notre Dame will elevate everyone's payouts in the Big Ten. The other schools, Washington, Oregon, Stanford, they may not. They probably won't. They might even have to come in at a lower number. Okay, they might have to come in, instead of coming in at 70 million or 75 million per year, whatever that average number is, they might have to come in at 60. Still a fantastic, epic, changing deal for those three universities if they came in at a lesser number. I've gone through this before where all the Big Ten schools, except for UCLA and USC, the other 14 schools, we've all those schools have had to take a buy-in to buy into the Big Ten network. They all took less money at some point. And if Oregon and Washington and Stanford would take less money, I think they would do it. So this is not a bucket of cold water in any expansion outside of Notre Dame. This is saying this is a another just marriage proposal to Notre Dame from the Big Ten. And I bet that number is really high, that extra they have to pay in rights fees. You've got NBC knowing what that number is if Notre Dame joined the Big Ten. You've got Notre Dame knowing what that number is if they joined the Big Ten. And here NBC is a current partner of Notre Dame, media partner, and it's been reported that NBC has offered Notre Dame $60 million, and Notre Dame might take that to stay independent for another year, another 2 years, what have you. Okay? And I'm going to have some comments about sources here in a moment. But I'm going to get to your questions. I'm sorry for the long rambling monologue. But again, my take is a little bit different than most people's takes. I don't see any significance that Notre Dame is the only team listed in the contract because they're the only independent team. So, okay, let's get to it. I'm going to try to take these questions. Last night, there were outstanding questions, incredible questions. I expect the same today. The Walking Geek. Oregon is right below Notre Dame in viewership, and they play in the least watched conference. It's a smart squeeze play. I have to agree with the Walking Geek. I talked about the huge brand of Oregon. The only problem with Oregon is I can't say the name correctly, but Oregon is a huge brand. They have a huge fan base. It's all across the Mountain West states. Their fan demographics is young, so it's a growing brand. They come all the way out to the western counties of Minnesota. If you go, I don't know, there's been these things where Facebook and other tools where people can kind of track or try to figure out where the fans are for each school, and Oregon is all over the place, up in the upper western mountain states and the Midwest. So you don't have Oregon is a huge brand, a good university, not a huge research university. They are AAU. For the academics, for the Big Ten presidents, they would rank below Washington. They would rank below Stanford, way below those two schools. But I think they're big brand. I think they're definitely a target for the Big Ten. There's no question about it. Would there be any incentive for the Big Ten to get Boston College? Any interest in locking down the greater Boston area? New England? Maybe renew the old Minnesota-Boston hockey rivalry. Well, that would be fantastic. If that rivalry... I don't think so, though. I don't think Boston... Well, first of all, Boston College is ACC school. They're locked down with the grant of rights. Don't think they'd be one of the schools that Big Ten would target if there was a dissolution, that crazy theory we've been talking about. However, the Boston College is free to join the Big Ten men's hockey conference. You all can do that. If we want the rivalry, I know the Big Ten would take in a heartbeat. Kevin Warren's trying to expand that conference. He's trying to get an eighth member to the conference. People say that the Big Ten, when they expand here, it will definitely be an even number. They'll go from 16 to 18 or 16 to 20. I don't know about that. I mean, if Notre Dame doesn't want to come in now, Big Ten, I could see Big Ten expanding to 19 with Oregon, Washington, Stanford, because the Big Ten's been sitting on 7 schools in the men's hockey conference, and having odd numbers in a hockey conference, as a Boston College fan would know, that is brutal because of the scheduling, how that is all scheduled, where you play a weekend. But Kevin Warren is a huge hockey fan, massive, and he has said it in public. He wants to expand the hockey conference for obvious reasons. So Boston College, if you want to join the Big Ten, that would be fantastic in men's hockey. I don't see a fit going forward as a full membership, however. Good question. Unequal revenue sharing isn't going to happen. This is Daniel, my brother from another mother in Indiana. There could be a buy-in, but probably less than what previous buy-ins were due to Fox ownership's increase in the Big Ten network. Well, there won't be unequal revenue sharing, Daniel, I believe, with the current members of the Big Ten Conference, right? Fully invested, they're all going to get paid the same. Once you are a fully invested member of the Big Ten, full ownership of your slice of the Big Ten network, that's always going to be equal revenue sharing. Coming in, I can see a possibility of Oregon, Washington, and Stanford taking a little bit less to ensure that they get into the conference. As you know, Daniel, your Indiana Hoosiers, they took less for 3 or 4 or 5 years in payments of the Big Ten network. That was owed to Indiana, but that money was shoveled off. That money was shoveled off to pay for Fox Sports paying for upfronting the cost to create the Big Ten network. So I think there's a chance. I respect your opinion on it. I know people disagree with me. I do think there's a slight chance. I do think there's a chance that Oregon, Washington, and Stanford would come in as less money. I know Big Ten doesn't like to do that, however. So I understand your point of view. Yeah, the Walking Greek. You wouldn't want their names in the contract. We'd be in trouble. Yeah. A lot of time has been spent with people discussing this is not good news for Washington, Oregon, and Stanford not to be in the name in the contract. They're not going to be in this contract. That can't happen. Big Ten is not going to do that. This is from Spooner763. Let's say Big Ten only adds 2 West Coast teams. Which 2 teams? Think Stanford gets in over Washington. Well, I think it's all about timing. We believe at peek around the corner, all 3, Oregon, Washington, Stanford, will join the Big Ten for different reasons. We do believe that Stanford is somewhat connected to Notre Dame. We know that the Big Ten presidents want Stanford. They want their back scratched. Through all this, they want something out of this. Of course, they're getting a lot with USC, UCLA. Don't get me wrong. Incredible research universities, academic institutions, but the Big Ten presidents want Stanford. If they went to only 2, if there was an announcement, let's say next week, and it says Oregon and Washington are expected to join the Big Ten Conference in time for the 2024 football season, I would still put money on Stanford being the 19th school at some point. Or if they say Washington and Stanford, I'd put money on Oregon being included. That's how we see it. That's the steam that we received. You know, if you've been following us in July, we talked about this hot window between August 15th and October 15th. We had this hot window. We talked about this even when people were reporting that the Big Ten had cooled on these teams, on Oregon and Washington and Stanford. It's more about timing. It's more about Notre Dame setting the clock. It's on their time. I think very well the Big Ten could go to 18 here shortly and then wait some more with Notre Dame. If you've noticed, Stanford hasn't said a word. Not a word. Silence is deafening. Silence is golden when trying to figure out what's going to happen. BTM and his associates, they always talk about silence is golden. USC was silent for months before the agreement came out. They didn't talk about the president of USC and the athletic director did not talk about anything in regards to what was going on in the Pac-12, what Kliavkoff was trying to do, except for there was a few photo ops and things of that nature. Oklahoma and Texas were completely silenced months before there was announced that they're going to join the SEC in 2025. Stanford's university never said a word on the day on June 30th in USC and UCLA when it was announced that they were joining the Big Ten. Stanford, I think there was another Pac school, but Stanford was basically the school that said nothing. And at Pac-12 media rights days, The athletic director was asked a question as the Big Ten, have you talked to the Big Ten? Have the Big Ten contacted you? And Stanford's athletic director said something to the effect of, I'm paraphrasing it, something like, Big Ten has not reached out to us with formal discussions, which basically is a phrase that means absolutely nothing. So, yeah, we're big on Stanford, Oregon, and Washington going to the Big Ten eventually. To the next question. And I'm sorry, I'm not going to be able to get to all your questions. I'm rambling on too long. I apologize for that. Arizona State has varsity hockey. If football drivers the bus, do you think Utah should be considered? Well, we have talked about, here at Peek Around the Corner, we just don't have that California steam. Other people are reporting it. Brett McMurphy. So if he is saying it, there's definitely steam behind it, that they're one of the 4 schools that could enter into the Big Ten, those 4 Pac-12 schools. We just, from the perch, if you read the article in the Los Angeles Times about how we broke the USC story, we see things from a certain perch, and that perch isn't seeing California, but that doesn't mean it's not happening. However, we've talked about Arizona State, nothing to do with really their hockey program. I mean, that's great they have a hockey program. That's fantastic. It shows that Arizona State, the Phoenix area, has a little bit of different culture. I mean, they have a lot of Midwesterns living down there. They have a lot of senior snowbirds traveling down there. There's a bigger and bigger Big Ten alumni living in the Phoenix area. So Arizona State is attractive to the Big Ten, and especially Kevin Warren, who went to Arizona State University, whose family, originates or has lived in Arizona. I think there's a soft place in Kevin Warren's heart for Arizona State. So I think they're a super long shot, but I think they're a live shot. I wouldn't take them off the board. Super long shot. Same with Utah. I think there is a institutional connection, what we've been told, between Utah and USC. So if California doesn't buy into the future of future college sports and football, where players are getting paid directly by the conference and their school, if California, Berkeley doesn't buy into all that stuff, and there's Notre Dame is not coming in, and you need a 4th school, then you could see Utah and Arizona State being extreme long shots. That's the best I can say for those 2 schools. Spooner, Stanford, or I think Oregon did make a statement. I will have to check on that. I'm pretty sure Oregon and Washington both made an official statement. I could be wrong. But anyways, we know. Before I forget, and I'll get back to the questions here in a bit. Before I forget, let's get back to this several sources part of SBJ's article. No other school is mentioned in these deals by name, and the contracts don't assign a dollar figure to any other school that may join the conference, according to several sources. Notre Dame is the only school that has specific language about the escalators. So who is the sources that is talking with SBJ? SBJ breaks a lot of news. Okay? Now this is complete speculation on my part, but I know from experience since 2016, and especially when I was put into this vortex of USC going to the Big Ten, sources have a motive most of the time when given information. Not all the time. Sometimes they're paying a favor back. Sometimes people are just scratching each other's backs. Sometimes the source is looking for access to something else. But usually there's a motivation behind when a source calls up somebody and says, this is what's going on. There's a motivation behind that. There's no way, in my opinion, that Oregon leaked this. There's no way that Oregon leaked the meeting that was reported yesterday by Brett McMurphy. We don't know when that happened. There's no way Oregon leaked that information, that Oregon met with Big Ten in Chicago. And there's no way that anybody other than, in my heavily guarded opinion, There's no way anyone leaked this to McMurphy except for someone in the Big Ten. Right? Someone in the Big Ten leaked this to McMurphy. That is just my opinion. To SBJ. That is my opinion. On both incidences, Big Ten is leaking. And for those, how do I put this? Even for those who read the article in the Los Angeles Times, Brady McCullough did an incredible job writing that story. But there was so much to it, some stuff had to be left out. The stuff that was left out in that article and what we're going to talk about in a later episode here at Peek Around the Corner, and we'll let you know when that happens, is the cloak and dagger that went on during that whole process. It cannot be underestimated, the cloak and dagger, that stuff that goes on. It is going on. It is going on. So it's going on when this stuff is happening. People are leaking, right? People are leaking stuff. How did SBJ know that Notre Dame was offered $60 million per year in a potential new contract with NBC, and that Notre Dame was quite happy with this and that they're leaning independent? Well, Big Ten didn't leak that, right? Notre Dame leaked that. So it's a game of leverage. We talked about this leverage that was going to happen between August 15th and October 15th. It's a leverage game. There's cloak and dagger. There's stuff going on. So the sources in regards to this SBJ article, they came, in my opinion only, they came from the Big Ten. And the motivation is to set this, to set the stage, to try to dislodge Notre Dame from independent, to say this is what we're doing for you. Of course, they know about this, but just to put it out there, that is my opinion. So let me know if you disagree or agree with me on who leaked this contract information in the Big Ten. Okay, let's see. Going on some other questions, or lots of comments. And of course, all of them are outstanding. If Notre Dame doesn't join, what are the odds that Stanford and USC keep them on the schedule? Would make more sense to play that intersectoral game somewhere else, or just to play at Berkeley every year. If Notre Dame doesn't join, I think Stanford and USC keeps playing them out of conference. I don't think the Big Ten is going to set it up to where USC and Stanford can't, or if USC can't, they're not going to set it up that USC can't play Notre Dame in the future in a non-conference game. I will say this, part of this love letter to Notre Dame, and all these negotiations that's been going on with Notre Dame using their leverage, Big Ten using their leverages. And Gene Smith said it a few days ago. We said it yesterday. We expect the Big Ten to be having no divisions in football. Even if there is like a 5 Pac-12 schools within the 20 schools, right? Let's say they add a Notre Dame, Washington, Oregon, and Stanford, and you've got 5 schools in the Pac. So it looked like it'd be a natural 5-school division pod in a 20-school, having 4 pods of 5 schools. We still think they're going to start with no divisions. Because with that, you can see how Notre Dame's permanent rivals could be Stanford, USC, and let's say Purdue, or Stanford, USC, or Michigan State. But Stanford and USC would be 2 of the Notre Dame's permanent rivals. Therefore, Notre Dame would be assured to have 1 game out in California on the road every year and 1 game at home in South Bend every year, playing a California school. And that's very important to Notre Dame. So it would get tricky if they set them up in the pods, right? Notre Dame wouldn't have, it would be very difficult for Notre Dame to have access to those 2 California schools, Stanford and USC. Just another log on the fire that's showing that Big Ten is really going forward to no divisions, regardless the composition of the 20 schools or the 18 schools, or if it remains 16 schools. Next question. I'm sorry, I'm just not, there's a lot of questions, not able to get to all of them. Is there any updates from BTM? Yeah, there is. Just nothing that nothing that would really further the conversation. Let's put it that way. Anything that we're talking about. Because we talk about a lot of little things that none of you would be interested in. But when we get that, we'll talk about it on this Peek Around the Corner channel. So, someone is saying that the University of Washington made a statement and Oregon did not. Okay, maybe Oregon did not make a statement. My bad. Yeah, Notre Dame would not have a buy-in. No, they would not have a buy-in. A lot of these questions I've covered. It's true that Oregon isn't a research powerhouse, but are certainly taking the steps that University of Washington and other universities did to become one. Yeah, that might be true, but there's quite a gap in difference between Oregon's research and Washington. There's a gap between University of Washington and almost any school. University of Washington is an enormous research university. Their research expenditures are massive. I think they're over $1 billion a year. I think they would be one of the top Big Ten schools. Washington has the market of Seattle. Yeah, but we think Oregon brings in the brand. Fox Sports would welcome Oregon. Stanford would be welcomed by Big Ten presidents. And then you've got Washington, who's got a little bit of everything. So we think those three schools, negotiations are being played out. We think it's going to happen. We have said that. We don't think anything is cooled. It's just all a numbers game. You're talking with, Big Ten is talking with potential new media partners that could come in and maybe go for a fourth window on that Saturday. You want a bidding process. You want competition. You want more than one media company to say, yes, we're interested. All that is being played out right now. So, but I think we're going to wrap this up. I'm sorry I didn't get to all your questions. This was our live show chat number 2 for this channel. I'm so happy you all joined me today. We had to talk about this media contract. We had to talk about how Notre Dame is part of this media contract and why the other schools are not. We do not think it's a big deal at all. And if you like this content, please hit the like button and please subscribe to our channel. There's a whole lot of people watching this channel but are not subscribing. Please subscribe. It helps us so much. There's a way to donate the show. The information is on the ticker. We thank you so much. So until next time, from all of us at Peek Around the Corner to all of you, please, you all take care of each other. Thanks.